Hello, and welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas into what it means to live as a follower of Jesus in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Here's your host, Lauren Richmond Jr.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today I'm welcoming Dr. Brian Kaylor. Brian is a writer and expert on issues of religion, politics, and communication. He also hosts the award-winning podcast, Baptist Without an Adjective. In addition to his work as editor and president of Word and Way, his writings have been published by CNN, Houston Chronicle, Kansas City Star, Washington Post, and many other outlets. He is also the author of 4 books on religion and politics. Brian has a PhD and an MA in communication from the University of Missouri and a BA in communication and Christian ministry from Southwest Baptist University. He previously served as Associate Director of ChurchNet, Assistant Professor of Communication Studies at James Madison University, Contributing Editor for Ethics Daily, and Pastor of Union Mound Baptist Church in Elkland, Missouri. He currently serves as Chair of both the Communication Advisory Committee and the Resolutions Committee for the Baptist World Alliance. Let's welcome Brian to the show. All right, welcome to the show, Dr. Brian Kaylor. Anything else you'd like our listeners to know about you?
Yeah, well, thanks, first of all, for having me on. I'm excited to talk about, some really critical issues. A lot of people say that religion and politics are things that you shouldn't bring up at polite conversation at dinner, and so I'm a horrible dinner guest, but I'm glad to be here on the podcast with you.
I can imagine. Share if you would, kind of about your journey of faith, what that looked like initially, what that looks like today.
Yeah, as I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, grew up in a family that, going back generations has been involved in the church. My maternal grandfather was a Baptist pastor, and so it's always been, part of who I am. I went to Southwest Baptist University in Missouri. I had a double major in communication, but also pastoral ministry. I pastored a Baptist church for a couple of years. I've worked for an association and a state convention. And so I've been, heavily involved in ministry at various levels. But at the same time, my faith journey has definitely evolved a lot over the years. I still consider myself a Baptist. I don't call myself a Southern Baptist. I spent several years as a member of a Mennonite congregation in Virginia. And so I have a much different, outlook on faith and how we can live it out in this society that we find ourselves in.
Great. What are some spiritual practices or disciplines that have sustained you that you might recommend others? Yeah,
one of the things that probably helps me the most is just getting out into nature. And that involves, daily going for a walk with my family. We love to go camping. And I think being out in creation is a really important spiritual practice to get, regrounded, to disconnect to some degree from, what's happening in the world, to be able to just turn things off. That's been one that's, really important. Another one that helps me, more daily is I try to be kind of mindfully in prayer, even while driving. And so, a simple little thing that I do is, when I'm on the road, if I pass a church, I just say, a simple little prayer for that church that they could be, sharing God's love, And so I think, things like that. I won't claim that I don't still honk and, yell at people if they cut me off when I'm driving, but, things like that can at least maybe keep us a little bit more focused.
Yeah. It's interesting. So you said you still identify as Baptist. We were sharing before we started recording. We come from similar geographic areas, sort of for college at least, similar Baptist backgrounds. I don't know if I sort of wonder. I've worked in so many denominations. I'm curious. I think part of me still identifies as Baptist myself too, and I'm curious, what is the version of Scripture when, for me, Scripture memorization was such a big part of my faith formation growing up that when I think of a Scripture verse, I always remember it in the King James Version. I'm curious, what's the version playing in your head?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are definitely some passages for me that come out King James in my head. My church was a bit more kind of contemporary. And so we were kind of a mix. We were really doing the NIV and the King James. And it kind of, so some passages are a little bit more poetic and some passages, but yeah, I was doing the memorization, all of the, the Bible drills and all that stuff growing up. And so those texts do still come back out.
It's pretty funny when you talk to someone who's never heard of a sword drill. Explain that.
Man, I love those days. I was good at that.
Yeah. Well, let's jump in. So I had Brian on to talk about kind of an area, as he said, church or religion and politics, which can be almost always is a controversial topic. And I think especially in our current time and place, many pastors and churches are really struggling and wrestling with what does it look like to be a person of faith and hold political views and how to make those mesh and how to do that in a faithful way. And then broadly speaking, there's a whole lot, I think, who are not even giving that any kind of thoughtful thing. They're just diving in. So let's start with this maybe. I assume you're familiar with Ed Stetzer, right? From Wheaton. He's talked a lot in podcasts. I've listened to him where he talks about what he calls the great sort. And I don't know if others are using that language, but certainly I imagine you're familiar with the concept. Basically, with COVID and all the restrictions, many people left churches and went to churches that were taking the pandemic more seriously or less seriously. And I think probably broadly speaking, there was a sort away from, or sort to churches who are taking it less serious. A lot of people, and again, this is kind of my anecdotal experience, left churches and went to those who are taking it less seriously. What are your thoughts kind of on that quote unquote great sort? And then this kind of increasing polarization that we're seeing in especially white American churches today?
Yeah, definitely. And obviously it's a trend that predates COVID of having essentially people sorting into red churches and blue churches. But COVID has exasperated that as you were just kind of, hinting at. And there's definitely been some churches that have had, church growth because they were flaunting public health measures,
right.
and not trying to keep their neighbors safe. But it's so fundamentally, this is happening, but fundamentally at the foundational level, what's happening, it's a sign of something worse that has happened, right? So it's a sign that our faith is no longer our primary way that we view the world. If you think of, classic, worldview, that politics has become the new chief way that we are sorting ourselves, even in religious spaces. And that's really devastating for the church. And we have research that actually backs this up. So Robert Putnam, he's best known for writing Bowling Alone.
Right.
He also co-authored with David Campbell of Notre Dame a book several years ago called American Grace. And they talk to Americans and they look at how attitudes about religion have changed. And one thing that they found was that 4 decades ago, that if your pastor said something that contradicted or conflicted with your chosen politics, that you were more likely to adjust your politics, maybe even change your political party, or at least your political leanings on that issue. But then today, and I say today, this is actually pre-COVID. I think COVID has made this even worse. But so even pre-COVID today, if your pastor says something that conflicts with your chosen politics, you're more likely to change your church than you are your politics. Or I guess if there's enough of you in the congregation, you'll change your pastor, at least in low church model. And so when I explain this research to pastors, I tell them it's worse than it sounds. Because it's not that you are now the second biggest influencer on people's worldview after politics. It's that they only tolerate you as long as you toe the party line. And so party ID has in many ways become the new religion in our society. And that's part of what we're seeing then with this great sort, that we're seeing even churches are no longer immune from partisanship that's coming in, which shouldn't surprise us. I mean, pastors got, 20 minutes, maybe 45 minutes if you go to a nice conservative Baptist church, right, where they can give a little bit more time to preach. But, that doesn't stand up against the other 7 days of the week listening to Fox News or MSNBC or wherever else you might be getting your news.
Yeah, that was a question I was going to ask you. Do you think is it almost simply boiled down to like the saying, like, you've got your congregation maybe an hour on Sunday versus cable news has them for 20 hours during the week?
I think that is very much one variable in this. That is part of the problem. It's the garbage in, garbage out, right? I mean, what you are what you eat. You consume, right? It becomes who you are. And so, I mean, Jesus warned us about this. It wasn't what comes out of the mouth, but what goes, in, that was, the more concerning. That's what corrupts. And so, yeah, one of these things is like, how do we get people to recognize that part of stewardship, part of being a disciple of Christ isn't just showing up on Sunday and then checking that off your list, but also being mindful and careful about the media that we consume throughout the week.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, what advice? I mean, I think I'll just straight out like identify as someone who identifies on the left. But I think, and again, perhaps my biased perspective is this is happening far more often from folks on the right. But I think the challenge still exists. Like, what advice do you have for like someone who's like, hey, and maybe again it's someone on the left who's like, hey, I'm in a church they're pretty conservative, the pastor's conservative. I don't feel like I fit in here. What should I do?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously people need to be at a place where they can feel convicted and they can grow in their faith. And so I think there could be an unhealthy church situation, right? I'm not going to tell you like, if your pastor doesn't believe such and such, you should walk out of the church today. I don't think we have to agree on everything. And I think, in fact, I think it's healthy. It's great when we have the diversity in our churches, including political diversity. And so that's one of the problems that's happening as we have red churches and blue churches increasingly, is that we're losing the diversity of the body of Christ. We're not gathering in fellowship with those who disagree with us. And so we've got to find a way to model that, because there is no other place in our society where coming together across political partisan differences, there's no other place in our society where that's encouraged, where that's rewarded. Mm-hmm. And so if it doesn't happen in the church, it's not going to happen anywhere. And so basically I'd say there's not really any place that's happening in our society right now.
So I'll jump ahead to something I was going to ask about here, but I think it fits in our context of this conversation right now. I think you're familiar with Ryan Burge, who I'm hopefully going to have on here coming up soon. He talks about in his book, The 20 Myths book, how historically the example of like the mainline church, a tradition that I'm currently well established in, Presbyterian USA, ELCA, UCC, DOC, UMC, American Baptist, and who am I forgetting? Somebody. Apologies who I'm forgetting. But the point is, like, in these traditions, historically at least, they've been very much kind of a purplish, whatever kind of politically diverse mix of folks. And if I read Ryan right, he kind of laments this kind of loss of, to use your word, political diversity. And now so many churches we see are very much one or the other. Like, what do you think? So if I'm hearing you right, you don't really like that kind of polarization, and you think that historical example is a really good thing to lean on, yes?
Yeah, I mean, so we don't want to have so obviously we could have diversity that's problematic, right? Mm-hmm. But to me, the issue here is, what is it that's bringing us and uniting us together? Mm-hmm. And so if you look at the big picture, it seems too often that we see in the research, right? People are leaving their churches if they don't agree with the politics. And so to me, that's fundamentally a problem. And so depending on where you are, there might be a geography, there might be an area where a church is where you're just not going to have as much natural diversity as you might otherwise. It might play out in ethnic terms, it might play out in political terms, right? So you got to be the local congregation for the people of God where your church is. So, I don't want to say that we have to reach some sort of level of, political diversity. Mm-hmm. But what I think where we have to get is that we are viewing our politics through the lens of our faith and not vice versa. And so that's where we're failing right now, is, I mean, we have pastors that are concerned, that are worried about preaching, in a certain way because it might be misconstrued. Even if they don't say something political, that if they say something else, people are reading into it, especially when we get close to elections, right?
Right.
People are reading in, they're trying to guess, which way is the pastor telling us to vote? I mean, some churches, you don't have to guess, they'll just come out and tell you, even though they shouldn't. But,
Right.
in others, they're trying to guess. And I hear this from pastors, right? That people come and confront them about something that they never actually said because people are reading the sermon through their political lens. And that's what's, really a problem. We can't just open up the text and listen to what God might be speaking to us in this moment.
Yeah, there's a pastor who I follow who's probably more on, the conservative side of the spectrum, theologically and politically, but, he talks about preaching sermons and people coming up to him and be like, "Oh, why are you preaching CRT?" or critical race theory for those perhaps unfamiliar. And he's like, "What do you mean CRT?" So, I mean, what advice do you have for a pastor who's like, "Hey, I'm just," a pastor would, I think, could faithfully say like, "Hey, I'm just trying to be faithful to the gospel as I understand, to the message of Jesus." But then people are reading into him like, or her, "Oh, you're a CRT person." What are your thoughts there? Again, and let me preface this by saying, I don't want to go along with this. I think it's a misnomer that CRT is inherently wrong, but just for context here.
Yeah, and so, you raise a good question because, I mean, so there's a couple of approaches. We could take the approach where we try to avoid the political controversies, right? And then you still get caught up in them, but, even if you try not to. And so, I mean, there is a little bit, though, a call for the other side. I mean, I don't think pastors should be partisan, and partisan is different than political, right? But when it comes to significant issues that are happening in the world today, if we don't talk about them from the pulpit, then the only place people are getting their worldview about these issues, be it CRT or anything else, is going to be from their political news sources or some other alternative source outside of the church. And so, sometimes I think we have to do the hard work of actually leaning into the controversies and maybe talk about, hey, what does it mean to talk honestly and openly about the racist past of our country, maybe even our own church and denomination, and how whatever you may think about CRT, this academic, mainly legal, if your kid is learning CRT in school, congratulations, they're in grad school, right? I mean, so like it's not actually, the scary thing that people have made it out to be. Right. But like, how can we separate even that idea? Even if you don't accept CRT, we can still talk and must talk openly about the continuing, ongoing systemic racism in the structures of our own society today. And if we don't do that from the pulpit, then it's only going to be the talking heads on cable news that are going to impact people on what they think about these critical issues.
So I'm hearing some pastors need some courage for sure. Because I mean, maybe let me ask this, Brian, because I feel like there's been times where I've tried to say something prophetically, and I feel like it just goes over people's heads. So do you think part of it is just, or do you think, I mean, mind you, the context I'm thinking of, we're kind of not within the last 5 years. Do you think people are just more tuned in these days? Do they have like these kind of trigger antennas to like be tuning out or tuning into like potentially buzzwords that could, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we definitely have to kind of like lead into it, build into it. I mean, I don't think you can just like have the opening sentence,
Right.
It's, with these political buzzwords, because then people might start tuning you out immediately. And so it's, how do we start with the text and then get there, right? Which is what I think good preaching should be about anyways. There's definitely, I think, some muscles that we have to rebuild, spiritual muscles, not only, from the pulpit, but, especially in the pews, that this is the place where we talk about these things. Our faith is highly political, right? I said, we should be partisan in our churches, but we can't not be political. I mean, to say that Christ is Lord is to say that Caesar is not, to say that Biden is not, to say that anybody else is not Lord, right? And so, it's a political statement. And if we try to pretend that we're going to not talk about politics, that is in itself a political decision that tends to only help the status quo.
Yeah.
And so it's, when we haven't been doing it, it's difficult work, and especially difficult work to do it well so that it just doesn't come out as, partisan talking points that you could find, somewhere else online.
Yeah. So I want to ask about, you keep going back to our faith is political, not partisan. Again, something I'd agree with, but I've seen pastors that I know and respect kind of argue on Twitter, which where all the best conversations happen, right?
Of course.
That kind of be like, how can someone faithfully lead a bipartisan church? Basically kind of making the claim that like a real faithful church is a church that's very much on the left. And of course, we know that the same thing happens on the right, where people like, I don't know, Robert Jeffers or whoever, like, basically leading like, pro-America rallies in church. And I think inherently claiming that the most faithful churches are those who are politically way on the right. So, I mean, because I don't necessarily know how to engage that. Maybe I'm better off just non-engaging that. But what are your thoughts on that? Kind of this kind of like, we're the faithful Christians because we're on the left, or we're the faithful Christians because we're on the right.
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of the things we have to remind us is that no party has a monopoly on God's will. And both political parties have positions, have official policies that conflict with what I think Scripture teaches, right? And so, that's one of the things that I think helps in this type of situation, is that we have to be willing to criticize both sides. And that's what you don't see in the partisan churches or from the partisan pastors and the partisan pulpits, right? Is they are quick to stand up and, say, "Thus saith the Lord," and be the quote prophet only against the other side.
Yeah.
And then when it's their own side, they completely ignore it. I mean, maybe just give a really practical, easy example on this. I told you already, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church.
Right.
It was, conservative congregation. And I grew up being taught during the Clinton presidency that character matters.
Right.
So when I wrote that over the last few years, that character matters, that we should be upset when a politician lies to us, I got called a liberal.
Right.
Which I have to admit was a surprise to the teenage version of myself, who was president of my high school Republican club. Is like, wait a minute. And in fact, it came from some of the same people, the people in my church, who taught me that character matters, and that's why we're voting conservative. Now said that when I said character matters, I'm a shill for the Democratic Party, and
right.
I'm a liberal, right? And I didn't change. And see, that's the difference, is being willing to say in 1996 that character matters and it makes somebody morally unfit to be trusted in office, and then be willing to say the same thing in 2020. And that means that you have taken on different political parties. But we have seen, I mean, there's polling on this. I forget if it was from Pew or PRI, that showed evangelicals talking about whether or not morality matters in a candidate. And the swing from pre-2016 to post-2016 shows that most white evangelicals have just completely reinvented their entire theology because of their embrace of one candidate. That's when we fail.
Yeah, we're of similar age, and I definitely remember those kind of conversations about, character matters and all that stuff in a president. And I think that was so startling for me. Again, we grew up in very similar contexts. To see this kind of love affair with someone who's very questionable, to say it generously, very questionable character, was really startling.
So we've seen, here's the irony. We've seen the evidence now that character matters.
Yeah.
I mean, the chaos that we saw, leading up to January 6th was the first time in American history that we did not have a peaceful transfer of power because we had a president who refused to leave office. I mean, conservative Christians in the 90s should be saying, see, we told you, character matters. If you have an amoral person in office, it's only going to lead to destruction. But instead, they're still defending and embracing him.
Yeah. Perhaps we're still seeing it with the whole Mar-a-Lago stuff with all those documents, right?
Of course he stole the documents and refused to turn them over. It's just who he is.
While there's so much of this left-right, who's more faithful, left or right, another aspect that I'm seeing in this kind of broad conversation is this kind of like oh, at least I'm not a moderate. Like the moderates, it reminds me, I don't know if you remember this, Brian, of the, what is it, the hot or cold text in Revelation, right?
Yeah.
Where it was like, I will spew you out of my mouth because you're lukewarm. Now
like
it's
Revelation
like
3:16 or something. Yeah.
Right. Now it's like, how dare you be moderate? Like the moderates are like the worse than they're seen as worse than again, pick your poison, right? If you're on the left, moderates are seen as worse than right. If you're on the right, moderates are seen worse than left. And I don't know if, again, probably because I sometimes perceive myself as being moderate in some ways and liberal in other ways. I'm like, I don't know if this is the healthy dynamic. What do you do with that where it's just like this kind of like, God forbid, be in the middle?
Yeah. So I think, and also, we have all these words that, come from similar roots and don't quite work exactly the same way. So there's also the idea of moderation, right? Which I do think is a very healthy thing,
sure.
Be it, in your eating habits,
right?
I think also in your politics, right? Your media consumption, right? The moderation can be very healthy in helping us not lose perspective. The idea of being a moderate in itself is always a little bit tough because it keeps changing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like who's a moderate really depends. It's less defined as a position and more of it's somewhere between the conservative and the liberal position. And as those move, right, then the moderate definition changes. Representative Cheney is now a moderate, and that's just like bizarre, right? And so she's not a moderate; she's very conservative, and so the moderate. But I think there are also politically, I think the idea of maybe nonpartisan or bipartisan or some sort of moderation, right? That can be a healthy perspective. There are also always those justice issues, though, that we have to be careful with. Where being a moderate is. Sometimes when people say they're being a moderate, it's just a friendlier way of saying they're opposed to something, right? This is what Martin Luther King Jr. was facing,
right? The white moderate, right?
Yeah, and so there's the word moderate is maybe not helpful because it's used in so many different ways.
Sure. So, and again, like, what advice do you have for like a pastor or a congregation who's like, I've got people on the left here, I've got people on the right here. We want to try to balance both views. Is that kind of like, I'm going to use your word there, moderation? Is that faithful, or does the pastor just kind of need to buckle down and be like, this is what it means to follow Jesus, I believe, and I'm going to lead my church in this kind of what's seen perhaps as an extreme position?
Yeah, so one of the things that helps us is that a lot of political issues, when we get to the policy level, right, we really can't say, and this is the biblical idea, right? Like we can have a general principle, right? Like there are basic principles about economic equality. There are basic principles about, welcoming the stranger. Now, what does that look like in an actual governmental policy? We can have disagreements on that. But one of the things that I think we're missing and that we're losing are some of these base values that, the idea of welcoming the stranger, of loving the other, is completely lost sometimes in these policy conversations. And that's where I think pastors need to be hanging out, is that we need to be hanging out on these values that if you accept these values, that probably will automatically exclude some political policies. It doesn't necessarily in all debate say that now we vote for this bill versus that amendment, right? But it will eliminate some political positions because unfortunately we have a lot of really horrible policies that are being pushed right now in our politics. And so we got to focus on what does it even mean to be a Christian? What is it? How does that change the way that we think about others, that we think about society, we think about our role and responsibility in it, that will have political implications without necessarily, always taking a side on the latest political debate.
So I'm thinking back to someone else I had as a guest, a UMC pastor here in my neck of the woods, Mark Feldmeyer, who published a book a couple of years ago, House Divided, and he kind of talked through, like, I don't remember, it was 10 or 12. He used the word axioms, kind of like broad general points that we can kind of like agree on to be kind of these foundational points that we can kind of build off of. And I'm wondering, just kind of hearing you, I wrote down from what you said, agreement on values and disagreement on policy. I guess that for a pastor, that might be a reasonable kind of like step, a building block or way to step forward on, is if you're going to say like, hey, we believe it's a biblical value of welcoming the stranger. We're not going to make professions or statements about direct policy. But that can be, would that be fair to be like hey, this is kind of a line in the sand, take it or leave it kind of approach?
I think so. And, I think, one of the things we have to do is even just, in some ways we have to get back to the basics. Like, what does it mean to, be a member of this kingdom, right? What does it mean to pledge allegiance to the kingdom, to say that you can't serve two masters, and so we're going to follow Jesus above all else, right? Some of that's deep theological work. It's also highly political, but it's deeply theological work. But I don't think we've really worked. I don't think there's a lot of memory muscle there. I don't think in a lot of congregations, we haven't worked that area to really think about what does it mean? And what does it mean to be a Christian in the empire of the world today? I mean, that's, we are, we're like Christians living in Rome. I mean, what does it mean to not give in to be conformed by the ways of our society and our world?
Yeah, that's helpful. So like I have a pastor friend. I was going to ask him if you want to shout out here, but I'll leave him anonymous. He's talked to me about wanting to speak more prophetically, more powerfully in his church, but he laments like, I've lost 12 families since like March of 2020 or roughly that time period. And Brian, I imagine you've been around church long enough, like at some point, like you got to pay the bills. And you realize like, hey, like we can't keep losing families here. What advice do you have for pastors who are just like, I want to speak more prophetically, but I'm also like, can't lose another family?
Yeah, that's tough. And I mean, it's a reality. And I hope that people that aren't pastors are paying attention to that. So if you like, I'll answer your question in a moment, but if you like something when your pastor is getting into some of these more difficult topics, like tell them, because normally they only hear the criticism, right?
Good.
And so they get scared then to do it again. And so encourage your pastors, especially when they're talking about really critical issues that we need to be talking about as Christians. I have a bit of an advantage. So I'm, in some ways, I'm not I'm not a pastor at a local church, and so my ministry at Word and Way is we are dealing with the news. Like people are always expecting us to be we're the ones that are supposed to be writing about the controversial topics of the day. It's just what we've been doing since 1896. I mean, at the same time, I lose subscribers if they get upset by something I write. So like I have that same economic pressure. I feel that, and there are certain topics that I know. If I write this, if I publish this, like somebody's going to get upset. I'm going to get, and I do it anyways. It's just my personality. So, but it's a real pressure. It's a real problem. And there's that tension then between how do we continue to pay the bills so that we can do ministry? And then the flip side of like, how do we actually form people to become more like Christ? There comes that point where I think every pastor has to, make their own decision at how do I make sure that I'm not just a chaplain for the empire, but that I'm actually, I think we're still stuck a lot of times in the 70s, 80s, 90s, all the focus on church growth and, all the books and all the ways, natural growth, church development, all these different things. And I'm not sure the biggest church is actually the spiritually healthiest church. Right? I think in many ways we've had this Christendom idea of a lot of people went to church because it was the cultural thing to do. And now we're trying to get down to people who are actually serious about following Jesus. And that might be a smaller group. But I don't think that is failure if we're getting people actually deeper into their faith and deeper into what does it mean to live this alternative vision of society, this alternative vision of politics that Jesus and the prophets proclaimed.
Yeah, so it's tough. To get practical here, really practical, like what are some methods, some approaches that you would advise for pastors? Because obviously I can imagine a pastor getting up on Sunday and being like, I don't know, let's take being like, Jesus welcomes a stranger, we need to welcome the stranger, take it or leave it, is going to ruffle some feathers, right?
Mic drop.
Yeah. What are some approaches that a pastor can do, whether it's prayer or Bible studies or individual conversations with leaders? What are some approaches, even like sermon approaches?
Yeah, I mean, so you just raised a really important point, and that is for pastors to realize that the sermon isn't their only way of leading people, right? So there are Bible studies, right? Going into Sunday school class and, picking a certain class. Some classes, you're going to know this at your church. Some classes are more ready for the difficult conversations than others. Or like you mentioned, prayer. And some of that can be even just simple ways of praying about something. I'm reminded of the story. This was in St. Louis, Missouri during the Civil War, and there was a pastor who the church tradition had always been they pray for the President of the United States. Mm-hmm. And so then after Abraham Lincoln was elected, he made the exact same prayer that he had always prayed. And it was a divided church, half Union supporting, half Confederate supporting, and things got out of hand, and half the Confederates left the Confederate half left the church, and they never came back. Right, it completely split the church. But he wasn't going to allow the theology of the congregation and the practices they had always done to be changed just because of politics, right? And so, there are those moments where I think we have to, draw the line in the sand. And that was just through prayer. That wasn't even a sermon. That was a prayer that, that was teaching theology and reminding people of theology even as election changed. And I think, I don't know, to me, I think we have to get back down deep into the text, right? So rather than just start, we don't start with the implications. Like, spend some time in the biblical stories, and you can walk people to help them get to the natural conclusion of the text, right? And so, instead of, welcome the stranger, now we have to do that, take it or leave it. We can just go through and read the stories where this is a very clear, explicit biblical. You don't even have to say take it or leave it. I mean, eventually after you read all the text, it's pretty obvious you either believe what this book says or you don't. And this is clearly what this book says. So that attitude, that approach of love, can go a long way.
Yeah, you mentioned prayer. I was reminded of a story of a pastor in my metro area who, pre kind of like the real, probably 7 years ago, approached an African-American pastor. Like, what's something I can do in my suburban white congregation that will cost me something? And this African-American pastor told him, include in your prayers lives of people of color who've been who have died by gun violence. And he said for several years it went kind of unnoticed, and then in 2020 or thereabouts, all of a sudden it just kind of like boom. And this was just a prayer of including and naming people. So it's a challenge, but I appreciate your emphasis on finding other ways to shape and form people.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're all about, right? Mm-hmm. That's what the church is supposed to be doing, is shaping and forming people into something new, a new creation.
Well, before we take a break, let me ask you one more question. This is a common refrain you probably heard again and again. So many pastors are just worn out because they've been, they're like, hey, I went to seminary to preach and teach and mentor and disciple, and now I'm like dealing with mask mandates and COVID restrictions and political turmoil. Do you have any advice just for kind of worn out, exhausted pastors?
Yeah, I mean, you have to know that this season is going to pass. So that's maybe the one hope. I mean, it seemed like it's gone on forever.
Right.
But, it will pass. It will get better. Try to stay in there. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes that means taking a break, taking some, for me, like I said, I like to get out into nature, but whatever it is, finding that place where it's just you and God and you can kind of put stuff aside. But it's tough. A lot of pastors are leaving ministry right now.
Yeah.
And I hear from them all the time that another one's leaving, and it's the politics of COVID.
Yeah. Well, let's take a quick break and we'll come back with some closing questions. All right, we're back with Dr. Brian Kaylor. Brian, I always tell folks these closing questions you can take as seriously or not as you'd like to. But if you were Pope for a day, what would you like to do with that day?
Yeah, it's funny asking a Baptist, if they were Pope for a day,
right.
We have a pretty bad reputation of being anti-Papist. But, wow, I mean, Pope for a day. One of the things that this is probably just coming to my mind is because, the Pope was recently, the actual Pope, was in Canada, he did his apology and just some of the mistreatment of Native Americans, First Nations people up in Canada. And but then after he did that, there was the protest during the middle of a mass, and people were holding up a sign that said "Rescind the doctrine," talking about the doctrine of discovery.
Yeah.
And so, if I was Pope for a day, that's probably what I'd spend my day doing. Is like, let me think of all of the things that the church had done in the past that we needed to acknowledge, right? Do this truth-telling and apology, and just spend the day rescinding all these horrible things and saying, sorry, let's not do this again, because I think there's a lot of cleanup work that we could do. Not just in their church tradition. If I was the Baptist Pope, I'd do the same thing for us, or the Disciples Pope.
Yeah.
Whoever lets me be Pope for a day, I'll do it. I'll clean up your house.
That's some good work for sure needed. And like you said, most any tradition probably has some work to do there. A theologian or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the answer would be probably Clarence Jordan. He's the founder of Koinonia Farm back in 1942 in Southwest Georgia. Wrote the Cotton Patch Gospel translation. Just an amazing figure, white Southern Baptist who decided that racism was wrong in the 1940s and was under attack by the Klan and others, firebombed, dynamited his farming, his interracial farming community, shot them with semi-automatic guns, right? And in a time when most Christians in the South and really in the country didn't get it, like he saw something. And so I would love just to sit down and just pick his brain and figure out, like, what was it? How did he read the Bible? How did he see what no one else was hardly seeing in his own congregation? His church that kicked him out because he dared to bring a person of color to the church.
Yeah. That's good. What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
Oh, man. You're asking me if I'm going to be optimistic or pessimistic now in this answer.
Well, the hopeful one is next, yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, the question is history going to remember this as one of those flare-up moments, right? Like, the late 1960s, we had a lot of political violence, and one of those moments when our systems, our structures, our very society was being tested and pushed to the limits, and things heated up, and then we got past it. Or was this the era when democracy died in the United States and we turned into something completely different? So,
right.
It's one of those two.
Okay. What do you hope for then?
I hope it was the first answer. I mean, January 6th was not the end. It was still very much the beginning. We are still very much in a dangerous place. And unfortunately, a lot of Christians are part of that. We saw the Christian flags, waving on January 6th. We're still seeing churches today that are promoting insurrectionists, that are promoting the theology and politics of insurrection. And we are in a dangerous place now for, a few more years still. And so I am hopeful that the fever will break, that we will get past this time period with very little violence. Very little more violence. We've already had too much. I'm hopeful that the church will repent, that will realize that what does it mean to say we pledge our allegiance to Jesus Christ and we cannot serve two masters? What does it mean to fully commit to this alternative kingdom of the gospel of the Prince of Peace? I'm hopeful, pessimistically hopeful, that can happen in the next few years.
Yeah, this makes me want to ask one more question if I can, Brian. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what I'd say. Like, I think there's probably no real possibility of really winning someone over who's like, who's in your church, or maybe you meet through some other social context who's like, yeah, election was stolen. I mean, what are some... I'm thinking there's no real, you're not going to logic them back into reality, right? Like, what do you do? Is it just kind of smile and care and try to be loving as possible and just pray for them? I mean,
yeah. I mean, you don't convince people to leave a cult in one conversation.
Right.
And I don't use that word lightly. I mean,
right.
But yeah, I mean, so the hard thing that we all have to remember is that every single person is still made in the image of God, right? I mean, it's cliche, but it's true that, and that what comes with that then is not only does God love them, but that there's still a chance for redemption. And it's not going to happen from one sermon or one conversation.
Right.
It's going to take a long time, but that I don't think anybody is beyond redemption. And if we can remember that as we go into our interactions with them, that should change the way we treat them. That even if we think that they are completely wrong, that they are pushing dangerous ideas, that they are still loved by God, made in the image of God, and not beyond redemption. But it's going to be tough.
Yeah. And I imagine, there's certainly some contexts where breaking off relationship is the safest thing. Like I wouldn't encourage someone, who's a person of color, who's LGBT to be like, tell them they have to be in a relationship with someone who's denying their humanity. Right. But for some of us, we're both, at least for me, I'm a white person, white male, so I have some measure of social privilege. So I have far more kind of privilege and margin to be able to exercise cost me something to be in a relationship. And that's what I guess I'll kind of wrap this up with. Like it seems like going back to what we talked about near the beginning about relationship, is that perhaps the biggest reason or selling point, to say it that way, about why we want to have more politically diverse churches, because really change comes through relationship?
Yeah. So, I hesitated a moment when you asked me who I'd like to go as, historical figure to talk to, because the second choice was Will Campbell. And he's known as the bootleg preacher, but he was influenced by Clarence Jordan. And it had been at Koinonia, but he was the only white person who was at the organizational meeting of Martin Luther King Jr.'s Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So, significant civil rights figure. But then also later in his ministry, he sparked controversy among some of his, liberal progressive friends, because he would go into the prisons to visit the imprisoned KKK, Grand Wizard and others that had been, but what he kept coming back to, for him, the gospel message hadn't changed. The message all along was it's about reconciliation, reconciling people together and to God, right? And so that was his ethos that drove him, when he's in the civil rights movement and when he's visiting imprisoned racists, right? And so, that's tough and convicting when you think about somebody who's doing that. But that is also, I think, the work, particularly for white men like us, that it's our people. Like, that's where the problem is right now. And, we need to be in those relationships with people of color, so that we can continue to learn from them and help, deal with our own ways of shedding some of our, white Christian dominant tradition ethos that we taught, that things that we learned that were more American than Christian, but then also in relationship with those who are where we used to be.
Right.
How do we lovingly help them to move on a journey that both of us have been on as well? And I think that idea of reconciling people together and to God, it should be what drives us.
Yeah. Well, this is a great conversation. I don't want to keep you any longer here, but share with our listeners how they can connect with you. Yeah,
great. Really appreciate the conversation. It's been a lot of fun. Word and Way, you can find us at wordandway.org, spell out the and. Like I said, we've been around since 1896. We still have a monthly print magazine, and you can find out how to subscribe there if you want. We have a lot of columns and news on the website as well. We have a podcast called Dangerous Dogma that you can find there at dogma.wordandway.org or wherever you're listening to this show. And then we have an email newsletter called A Public Witness. And so particularly if you've enjoyed this conversation, been challenged or interested in it, I would encourage you to sign up for that, because this is really where we do our work, focusing long-form journalism, thinking about the intersection of faith, culture, and politics. Mm-hmm. So you can find that at publicwitness.wordandway.org. Would love to continue in conversation with some of your listeners.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Brian. Really appreciate the time and the conversation. I always leave folks with a word of peace, so may God's peace be with you.
Well, thanks.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. To learn more about Lauren or the podcast, visit future-christian.com. One more thing before you go. Do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. And if you're feeling especially generous, leave a review. It really helps us get the word out to more people about the podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is a production of Torn Curtain Arts and Resonate Media. Our episodes were mixed by Danny Burton, and the production support is provided by Paul Romick-Levitt. Thanks, and go in peace.